special guest today is Holley Cornetto. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Holley, and how you got started in the horror genre?
So I guess I've always been a reader. When I was young, I always grew up reading. My mom was an avid reader, so I kind of grew up that was my default hobby.
Yeah.
We used to go and buy books at the used bookstores and at thrift stores and things, and we'd trade them. I think I started probably horror with Goosebumps. So that's really where I think my love of the genre began.
Yeah.
When I got to the point where I was older, I got my library science degree, and I had gone back to reading fiction because it had been a few years in college. I hadn't read much fiction, mostly nonfiction because I studied history. But then when I became a librarian, I went back to reading fiction and kind of rediscovered that love of fiction and decided, hey, you know what? I want to try my hand at writing. And the first few things I wrote weren't horror. I wrote a little bit of fantasy, even some literary stuff here and there. But I kind of, focused in on that adage that they say, to write the story that you want to read. And I finally just gave myself permission to write a horror story. And it was one of the best things at that point, that I had ever written. So I think after that, and just seeing that, I don't know if it was better because I enjoyed it more or if it was better because objectively, as a fan of horror, I'm going to like horror stories more.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe it's all in my mind, but that's kind of what got me on that path. And then after I wrote that initial horror story, I've pretty much stuck with horror since. Then I went off sci-fi or fantasy here and there, but mostly horror at this point.
Yeah, I think if you love a specific genre, you will write better in that genre.
Yeah, I tend to agree because I think too that a lot of what makes great writing is reading and being familiar with the tropes that people associate with your genre and being familiar with the classic stories, things like that. And because I've read so much horror in my lifetime, I feel like I know. I mean, I won't say I know everything because I don't read every single thing that comes out, but it helped me kind of get a feel for what works in the genre.
Yeah, that's right. So what was the first horror story that you wrote?
Well, the first one that I wrote was actually a story called Forest Man, which was published by Erie River Publishing in an anthology that they had called It Calls from the Forest.
Yeah.
And it was funny because that particular story had gotten a lot of feedback and reviews, and people were like, oh, I loved this story. I loved this story. It was my favorite one in the collection. So I ended up expanding that story. And that short story is actually what became my first novella, just an expanded version of it.
Yeah. How did that one go for you once you'd extended it?
It was really good. It was one of those things where the characters, if when you're writing, sometimes you have characters that just stay with you.
Yeah.
So these characters did. I kept wanting to go back, and so turning that into a novella was great. It helped me to write something longer because that was the first really longer piece of fiction I had written at that point. So the fact that I already had the short story to help map it out was good, because different writers write different ways. I mean, obviously we all have different processes, but for me, I like to outline. I'm kind of like a planner. And so for me, having the short story kind of served as an outline. And so, I put that down, and I still have plans actually for a sequel for that because those characters still haven't really let me go yet. They keep talking to me, which, some people might say makes me crazy hearing voices, but I think it's part of being a writer.
Yeah, but you created those characters, so you're allowed that.
Yeah, so just voices in my head that I made up. It's fine. I'm just talking to my imaginary friends. We're cool. Not insane.
Okay, so have you got any specific writing routine or a ritual that lets you get into the horror mindset?
Well, I like music. So I often, when I'm writing something, I try to put together some kind of playlist. So right now, I'm working on a novel that is set in the 90s. So I have this extensive list of 90s like music that I put on and listen to when I'm writing that specific work. I have another one that I was writing a piece that was set in Alabama, and so it had a lot of like, I don't know, like dark country, like that kind of Southern roots, American South kind of vibe to it. But that's really one of the things that helps me like feel like in a particular mood. It helps me set the mood. But in terms of like practical things, my husband writes as well. So we often pack up and go to like a coffee shop or a cafe or something for our writing, because at home, like there's just too many distractions. Like I cannot concentrate when I'm at my house. I've got kids, I've got dogs, I've got a mountain of laundry waiting for me. I've got dirty dishes glaring at me from the sink. So it's really hard for me to like just sit down and say, I'm going to write. But if we go out, if I take the trouble to get in the car and drive somewhere, I feel like there's a little bit of pressure there that, okay, I'm not going to have left my house for nothing. I came all the way here, so I've got to be productive. Yeah. And it's little bits of pressure like that help me, because it's hard to prioritize writing sometimes when you're busy. But if you set aside that time and you kind of pressure yourself to do it, it tends to work out better, at least for me.
Yeah. So do you use any particular tools or software to help you organize? Because I know you said you're a plotter.
No, I don't. I have, let's see. It is organized chaos. I don't know. I use Word mostly. And I keep folders and stuff. So I have like a folder for each work in progress. And then I have like a master document for whatever that work in progress is, where I add things after, to put it all together. But I tend to open small documents and write like a chapter or something at a time in those individual documents. Yeah. I tried using Google Docs before, and sometimes I do that depending on the project, because if I'm working on different computers and I want it to be easy to access from device to device, I'll tend to do Google Docs just because it's convenient like that. Yeah. But I don't have any kind of fancy system. Like I really wish I did. I feel like I would be more like official and writery if I had like.
It's okay.
I use Scrivener.
It's okay. I was speaking to somebody earlier on today, and they use their patio doors and whiteboard pens, so that's perfectly fine.
Oh wow! I see the appeal of that. Every now and then, I like to pick up if I am somewhere and I have absolutely no access to a keyboard and an idea strikes me, I will pick up a pen and whatever surface I have to write on and get it down right then. So I feel that.
It's a good way of doing it. So can you describe any sort of like themes or messages that you often explore in your work, either by accident or deliberately?
Well, deliberately, I think a lot of my stories have protagonists who are young people. So when I say young people, I mean, I think the younger end might be like 12-ish, and the older end of my major characters tends to top out like in their late teens. I do have one character who's older than that, but primarily I write young people, and I think there's a lot of reasons, but I grew up in the American South, and where I grew up, there was a lot of like fundamentalist religion and a lot of things like that. And I went to a lot of different like, churches, and I've been to churches where they speak in tongues and where they do like snake handling and stuff like that. Yeah. And I think I look back as an adult on parts of my childhood and I'm kind of horrified by the things that I went through that at the time seemed perfectly normal because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And it scares me. And so I deal with those themes a lot, I think, of like a child who, or a young person who is kind of like learning about the world on their own terms for the first time, or, you know, discover something horrifying that's going on. Because, you know, it can be a scary world when you're a kid and you're kind of vulnerable to like the adults around you. Like they kind of make all the decisions on your behalf. And I mean, if you're lucky and you have good parents and, you know, people who care about you, then I think, you know, that could be a good thing.
Yeah.
But there are cases where, you know, there's always stuff that happens and, you know, kids still have that wonder about them. They still believe that things like monsters, you know, lurking in the forest could be real. And I think you lose some of that as an adult. You know, you don't fear the monster in the closet anymore. So I'm intrigued by young characters for all of these reasons, I think. So I think that might be a recurring theme in my work is just like, you know, the horrors of childhood, either real or imagined.
Yeah. A lot of people do put their experiences in their books. So yeah, that would be your experience, wouldn't it, really?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. I mean, I have never, thankfully, been through anything as horrific as my character's experience, because obviously it's fiction and you want to, you know, in horror, you want to push as far as you can, you know. So luckily, I haven't experienced anything quite as terrible as my characters do. But that's definitely where that inspiration comes from, you know, that whole, well, let's see what happens if we put them in this situation.
Yeah. So how do you decide on the settings for the stories?
That's a harder one. So I think that it to some point becomes what feels right, because for me, so my novella takes place in New Jersey, which is where I currently live. And part of the reason for that is the story itself was inspired by some of the areas nearby me. So we have these communities that were like vacation homes once upon a time, little log cabins surrounding lakes, where like wealthy families used to come, or families who lived in New York City, because I'm not that far away from New York City. Families used to come here and like spend their summers at the lake. And I was really intrigued by that because, you know, growing up in Alabama, I'd never seen anything like that. So for that story, it was really that whole like lake community and spending a summer at the lake that sort of, I guess, was the spark for that story. It's like, And so for me, that was a no-brainer that I had to set it here in New Jersey because that's where I initially had the spark. Some of my other stories, like my novel that came out earlier this year, is set in Alabama. And part of the reason for that is because obviously that's where I grew up. So I was kind of exploring that. And because I enjoy some fiction that's set in the South, in the American South, I like that vibe, the whole Southern Gothic thing. But I feel like some of it's outdated a bit, like the way that we used to consider Southern Gothic doesn't always match up to the way that people in the South currently live and the way I grew up. So I wanted to kind of show that too, because there are desperate situations with people in poverty, people just scraping by, you know, trying to get by day to day and live their lives. And you know, there's good and bad in that, because when people are desperate, you know, they can be a little more susceptible to doing things we might not normally do.
Yeah.
So I like those ideas in that environment. And I liked, for this particular book, it's set in a trailer park in Alabama. And I kind of wanted to explore that because I think these are people and characters that don't get the spotlight a lot. So I wanted to show them in all their like gritty glory, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I guess, where the setting for that came from. And those are the big ones. For short stories, it really just depends on who the character is and what kind of obstacles I'm going to put them up against. So, certain social issues, it might be a story better set in the American South. For, other types of stories, maybe not. I don't think I've ever set any story outside of the US, though. Not yet.
Yeah. Try setting one in the UK with the weather.
I would love to, but I know so little about the UK that I would feel like, like I would need to do a lot of research to do that. I want to visit, though. It's on my list of places to see. Maybe then.
I don't know why.
I like to travel. I've been to Ireland, which was lovely. I've been to New Zealand, which was lovely. So I think Scotland and England are both on my list.
Okay. So right. So what's been the hardest part or difficultest part in a scene that you've ever had to write?
I think it's knowing how far to go with things like violence. I have in the latest novel, there's some violence against a young girl. She's physically assaulted, and then there's also a sacrifice with a scene with animals, where I don't want it to be so extreme that people cringe when they read it. I mean, I know it's horror, but it's a personal preference of mine. So I try to mirror my own preferences in what I write. So it was something where it's a difficult balance because you need it to be horrifying enough to get your point across and to have the reader feel something, even if it's just feel sympathy for the characters who are going through it. But I don't want it to be so graphically written and so horrifying that, somebody has to put the book down because they can't keep on with it. And also, I don't like to read scenes of explicit torture and things like that. I can't. As a horror writer, I know we all have our limits as readers and writers, and for me, that's my limit, because those are the visuals that I can't get out of my head when I lay down at night. So for me, it's definitely balancing that, and still making it horrific enough that it's, actually horror, that it is something that, readers will have an emotional response to. So I think for me, definitely the most difficult part is that balance. And then specifically in the book I wrote, there, like I said, a couple of scenes with animals and young girls, and it's really heartbreaking for those characters. And it was hard to write. It was hard to write.
Okay, so can you talk about one of your most popular books and why you think it was popular?
Well, okay, so I guess the most recent release, it came out in June. It's called They Are Cursed Like You. It is the one I've been talking about, Trailer Park, which is book 1. So it's book 1 in what's going to be a 3-book series. And I think that it's gotten some good attention so far. The reviews have been good. I've been getting messages from readers, saying, oh my gosh, I can't wait for the next book and things like that. And for me, I think that the big thing is that my characters are flawed, but at the end of the day, readers tend to like them. Perhaps because they have flaws. They're not perfect people, and they're in a very imperfect situation. So they struggle, and their struggles are real and human. All the while, there are supernatural elements. Obviously, we're talking about witches, so they get involved with magic. There are those elements there as well. So it's an interesting balance, trying to make sure that your characters feel well realized and are likable, while also sometimes making bad choices and doing terrible things.
Yeah.
So I think that most of the positive feedback that I've gotten about it has been, that the character work is solid, that, you know, people like following the characters, that they like that the story doesn't pull back, that it is bloody and gory, and it's a little gritty. And so the other compliment that it's gotten is that it's quickly paced. So it's a quick read. Like, you could pick it up and read through it, get kind of sucked in and read through it in like a day or two, because it's, you know, it flows. Like, it's important to me in everything I write that there aren't big lulls, because I've read books that were very long that one of my critiques would be, you know, that this could have been like 100 pages shorter.
Yeah.
And I never want anyone to say that about my own books. I never want them to get to the middle and be like, oh my gosh, this is boring, and put it down. I want the reader to be sucked in from the moment that they, you know, turn the first page and just feel like they have to carry through to the end.
Yeah. I think every author wants that, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, like I said, I've picked up some books that were like, you know, 800, 900 plus pages, where, you know, I have to put them down for a while and take a break from them. But yeah, that's just, you know, it's not, for me, one of the things I like about horror is that, you know, you have that sense of suspense and dread and terror. And I think that short form works really well for those emotions. So things like short stories, novellas, and short novels, because you can keep that tension alive. You know, you can keep that suspense going, you know, over those page limits.
Yeah. So I know you've touched on it a little bit, but so have you got a memorable piece of feedback from a reader that's made an impact on you?
You know, a couple. So I'll say that it was really amazing, like some of the first times that people were reading my books, and they were like, you know, putting up reviews and things. But I think like getting like a private message from a reader, like via Facebook or something, where they say, you know, I just finished this book and oh my God. But one of them had told me that when he ended the book, he said it felt like he was leaving behind like friends, like these were like people that he really knew. He said, you know, I felt like, you know, these were pals that I had apart from. And he said, the end of his statement was, hurry up with book 2. So I think that was great for me because, you know, having released a novel in book 1 in a series, like you start working on the second book while you're seeing like the first book, like people read it and, you know, respond to it. Yeah. So for me, like I had been in a bit of a slump, like a little bit of a lull, because my real life had gotten busy. My professional life I say real life, but my professional life had gotten busy. So it was really easy for me to be like, oh, well, I'll work on the story later. But when you have people that say, you know, oh my gosh, you know, I loved this, I can't wait for the second book, it really like kind of lights that fire under you that, okay, I've got to get this out because people are waiting for it. You know, people want this. So it's very validating. And that's probably like my favorite type of experience to have.
Fantastic. So are there any exciting projects that you're currently working on?
Well, yes. So I actually have 2 novels in progress right now. One of them is the sequel to the Trailer Park Witches, which is, like I said, the most recent release. So book 2 in that series I'm working on, and I'm really excited because it takes place in the 90s, and that, you know, is a period in which I grew up. Heavily influenced, I think this whole series is heavily influenced by the movie The Craft. Are you familiar with the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was a young, impressionable teenager, that movie was released in theaters, and I just loved the whole vibe, like the female rage, like these girls who were doing things that women aren't, quote unquote, supposed to do, and just seeing them be angry and seeing them, you know, just charge it head on was something that I loved. It really resonated with me, and it stuck with me for all these years. So the prequel for this book, the book 2 in the series, is set in the 90s. So I'm really excited about that. I've been having fun with that, kind of revisiting my own like experience in the 90s and growing up and trying to infuse that into the story. And then the other novel that I'm working on is a standalone novel, and it's also set in the South. It's also set in Alabama. The tentative title of that one is Heaven's Lake, and it's based on a short story that I had written, another one that, people had said, oh, you should expand on this, it's really good. And I kind of ruminated on it for a while, and I was like, you know what? Yes, there is more to this story. So both of those are my works in progress at the moment, and I'm excited about both of them for different reasons. More excited, I think, about the Trailer Park Witches at this point, just because I'm getting that feedback from readers now, starting to get reviews in now and things, and just seeing people being excited about it makes me even more excited to want to work on the project.
Yeah. When you get things like that, it does make you really excited, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, because it's hard sometimes. I don't know about other writers. I can only speak for myself, but sometimes it's easy to get down on yourself. That you see other people who are writing and succeeding and publishing lots of things, and sometimes it's easy for that imposter syndrome to creep in and to be like, oh, you're not doing enough, or you don't write as well as this writer, or whatever the case may be, and it's easy to get discouraged. So having that, the positive feedback and the validation, it really quiets those voices, and makes you think, what, it doesn't matter, because somebody somewhere likes what you're doing. So stop feeling sorry for yourself and do it.
That's right. I mean, one person might love your book, another person might hate it, but at the end of the day, you're not really after the person that hates it. That's not your audience.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think with my book, with the Trailer Park Witches, the characters in here are they're almost exclusively female. All of the main characters are female, and a lot of them are queer. And I think I had some reviewers who messaged me and like, why are they all, this way, or why is this the case? And I have to tell myself, those people weren't going to like the story anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like once you cross it off because they are all female or they are queer or whatever the case is in whatever you're writing, if you have people that criticize it for those things, then those aren't your readers. Those are other people's readers.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, like you said, it's a big part of that you're not going to win those people over anyway.
That's right. So have you, what advice would you give to aspiring writers who want to break into the horror genre?
I think for me, the first and foremost thing I would say is make sure that you have something that you can work on that you feel good about, passionate about working on, and complete it. I know a lot of writers because I teach creative writing, so I do meet a lot of aspiring writers and newer writers, and many of them, they want to write and they like the idea of writing, but they might say, I haven't finished a story yet. And there's a lot of different reasons why people don't finish when they start. Sometimes they read their prose and they get discouraged and they think, I don't know what I'm doing, or things like that. And I'll say that nobody knows what they're doing at first, or at least if they do, I don't know who those people are. And that we all write really bad first drafts. There may be somebody out there who can produce a perfect story on their first try, but for most of us, it's a process. And writing a draft is not even half the work. You get your draft written and that's great, but then you've got to revise it. And you've got to get feedback, and you've got to revise it again. So you can't compare your rough draft to a polished, finished, published piece, by a writer who's got many, many more years of experience than you. It's just not, writing isn't necessarily a talent that you're born with. Some people develop the skill at it, but it's like any other skill. It's like playing a sport or any other thing that you do. The more you practice and the more time that you invest into it, the better you're going to get. And your first story isn't going to be your best story, and that's okay. So write it, get it over with, polish it up so that you can move on to writing better things.
That's right. So where can we find your books, Holley?
All right. Well, they're on Amazon. So my novella is called We Haunt These Woods, and it was published by Bleeding Edge Books in 2022. And my novel is They Are Cursed Like You, and it was published by Erie River Publishing in June of 2023. They're both available on Amazon, or you can visit my website, holleycornetto.com, and I have links to those on my homepage.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for accepting my offer.
I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me. I was very flattered.
You're very welcome. You're a horror writer, and it's like I say, every horror writer deserves to shine and have a voice.
I appreciate that. I think one of the most difficult things about writing is getting your name out there, having people know who you are. If you've got a great book, that's great. But if no one knows about it, they're not going to read it. So it's hard. So I appreciate what you do. Thank you for spotlighting horror authors, because it is a tough market out there.
It's a tough market. It's hard to market yourself and trying to get yourself noticed. So, yeah, I totally agree.